But my beats, they are hard.
Hello and welcome to another edition of the BCSN Sports Wrap. Brian Fulford and AD Drew here, getting ready for week number 13. That's right, we are at week number 13. The Division II regular season is done. The Division II schools are getting ready to head into the playoffs. And then we've got the final week of the regular season for the FCS schools. Of course, we're not quite done yet. One more week to go before we can truly know what the conference championships or conference champions or the teams heading to the Celebration Bowl will look like. AD, what's good, my man? How you doing?
Playoffs? Did you say playoffs? What was your favorite coach from the Indianapolis Colts, Brian?
That's my man, Jim Morris Sr. Playoffs.
Yes.
Classic line.
It's that
time. Yes, sir. And we've got a special guest joining us on this podcast from D2Football.com, Mr. Kris Ferguson. Kris, how you doing, my man?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Great, man. Glad to have you on. I figured this was a great time to get our Division II experts in. Kris has been covering the CIAA all season long. Of course, if you guys have not been following along to D2Football.com, you're missing out. All of Kris's work. Of course, AD has his strong ties in the SIAC with Tuskegee. Even accurately predicted, I must say, the HBCU teams that would get into the playoffs. I'm just curious. For giggles here, Kris, did you do any kind of predictions as it related to the D2? Who would get in, anything like that? I'm not really sure I saw any predictive stuff from you or not.
So I did something at the beginning of the year to predict the conference champion, and I had Bowie State repeating, and then I had Virginia Union being second and Fayetteville State third. So I didn't have Virginia State anywhere near the top of the bunch. But
yeah,
I figured, there will probably be, Virginia Union and Bowie State would get playoff bids, and that didn't quite work out. I got 1 out of 2.
Right, yeah. No, I figured Virginia State was sort of the surprise of the year. I think if you kind of look back at the CIAA season, I don't know. You guys tell me, is it a bigger surprise that Bowie went unbeaten or that Virginia State came to really within, I guess, a few days or a week of being, an at-large team into the playoffs? So I'll start with you, Kris, and then you, AD.
The bigger surprise, probably Bowie going unbeaten, because, I didn't think that Virginia State would stay down for very long. They had to recover from losing Trent Cannon to graduation, and they found that running game magic that they're so used to and accustomed to having under Reggie Barlow. But Bowie going undefeated, not knowing that who was going to replace Amir Hall. They started the season with Gaston Cooper as quarterback. And then he got hurt, and then Jerome Johnson just comes out of nowhere and provides such a spark in a revised offense, and the defense is like, I mean, they're just lights out. For them to have gone 11-0, I'd say that's probably the bigger surprise.
And you, AD?
Well, I won't reiterate what Kris just said, because he's absolutely right with everything that he just broke down. I actually had Union to win the CIAA in my preseason picks, but I'm going to throw a curveball to you, Bryan. My biggest surprise in the conference was Chowan, and them not being what we thought they could be this particular year. We knew they were good offensively. You had questions about their defense. Would their defense be able to keep them in games? But the ups and downs that Chowan had this year really surprised me. And then obviously the coaching change mid-season, that was my biggest shock in the CIAA this year.
That's a good point. Yeah, I mean, Chowan, they, statistically, they were still just as good offensively. They had probably the conference's, well, not probably, they did have the conference's leading rusher. I mean, they had a young man that who was the second string running back, become the conference's leading rusher, one of the top running backs in Division II, Deshaun Wethington with 1,300-plus yards. Came within a yard of the single-season rushing mark with 307, but the defense was just putrid. I mean, it was nasty how bad the defense was. What about Chowan, Kris? I mean, that was pretty bad. I mean, and they still, the crazy part is they still got a lot of guys coming back, including, the quarterback, receiver, and running back. I mean, is the coaching change going to be good enough to inspire the defense? Because, I mean, this is be an interesting team next year if they ever figure it out on defense.
Well, Chowan, they didn't go outside for coaching. They upgraded the offensive coordinator to head coach going into the off season, and it's one of those things where they definitely need some upgrades. They need a force on the defensive line, to put some pressure on some of these teams, and they need an upgraded wide receiver, because the games that I watched, you would see where Bryce Witt would put the ball on the money, and the receivers they just couldn't catch the ball. The ball bounced off their hand, and it would be interception, and that certainly accounted for some of the interceptions that Bryce had, and I think he sometimes would just try a little too hard. But even then, yeah, I mean, they still had the most productive offense in the CIAA. They just, I just don't know on defense what they're going to do. I think they need to settle on one defensive coordinator and then kind of go from there.
Yeah, I really hope that they get it fixed, because I think Bryce Witt is in a position to break a lot of records next year. And so that's sort of my Christmas wish list for Chowan, that they get some help defensively and hey, even throw in some receivers. I would even go as far, you guys were talking about surprises, and you mentioned Jerome Johnson, and it's another discussion, but when we look at the whole year, I have a feeling we're going to be talking about Jerome Johnson and the young man out at Alcorn State, Felix Harper, as the two backups that came out of nowhere and set the world on black college football on fire. I mean, because they're similar. Well, I guess they're similar in terms of backups that were sort of taking the place of all conference players. And then they just, get their teams right back to where they were. Back to this season, though, last thing before we get into talking about Bowie State, and I guess this will kind of lead into the championship game, Fayetteville State. Third year in a row, they go to the championship game. on paper, I mean, the last 2 years, I think we have been critical of their schedule just because they've actually benefited. I don't want to make it sound like they had anything to do with the CIAA scheduling, but they benefited from the last 2 years of not playing the top teams. At no point in the last 2 seasons have they played any of the top 6 teams from the North Division. And so they benefited tremendously. But was this in your eyes, Kris, was this a Fayetteville State that you thought was better than last year's? I thought they were a little bit better from an offensive standpoint. And I thought beating Winston-Salem State sort of was something to get them over the hump. What is your thoughts on Fayetteville State and what they've done over the last couple seasons?
I didn't think Fayetteville State was any better on offense. I thought they were even better on defense, though. Oh, my goodness. The defense, they were just ferocious on defense. When you look at Krishan Springs and Keyshawn James and Nigel Peel, like those guys, Elvin De La Rosa in the secondary, the defense was just so good. And it just kind of went to waste because the offense really, Fayetteville State's not known to be a passing offense. They do just enough on passing to kind of get things going, but they're very reliant on the rushing game. And when that's not working, then they just kind of get stuck. And they were they were better on offense. They didn't take the step that I was hoping that they would take in order to truly challenge the upper tier of the CIAA North. But the offense, I should say, the offense was better. The rushing game was even better, but the passing game was pretty much par for the course.
Right. Any thoughts, AD, on Fayetteville State?
No, the only thing I'm going to say about Fayetteville State is when you realize that you're going to be playing, no disrespect to Elizabeth City and Lincoln, but when you realize that you're going to be playing the weaker teams as your crossover games in the CIAA, you've got to make sure that you go out and have your non-conference schedule just stellar, so that you can get those points that you need as far as your RPI. And then, like Kris was saying off air, you've got to win those games. You not only your program but your conference has to win those games so that your conference gets that rating that it needs, so that you can afford to lose a game later on if you're beating a top team out of conference.
Yeah.
But
so
I would say though that I think Fayetteville tried to do that with Benedict, and I don't think anybody expected Benedict to just have so bad of a season this year.
Yeah. And I will give you that one. No one expected. Matter of fact, I think we had Benedict either winning
they were voted on to finish top 3. They even got some first place votes, if I'm not mistaken, in the preseason.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, they tried, but that did not help. That Benedict was good, and then they were competitive against Wingate. But once again, you've got to win those games, because when you go down the schedule, you see a Lincoln, you see Elizabeth City, you see Shawan was not what you expected them to be. Those are the games that you can't do anything about them. So you got to find tougher competition.
Yeah, and it's kind of, and it's I don't know if it would have mattered the fact that they lost that game to who was it? They lost 23-21 to on that late field goal. Was that
St. Augustine? But you can't. But those are the games that you cannot lose those games. You cannot lose those games to teams that are 2 and whatever at that point in time in the season. And I'm gonna throw one other team out there no one expected after Livingstone got off that 4-0 start to drop off the way that they did. They just fell off the cliff this year.
Kris, what about that? Is that the oddest thing where you start out 4-0 and then they played Virginia Union, and whatever happened, it's like Virginia Union stole their soul, and it's like everything else after that game just went south.
I am cracking up over here. So Livingstone is so predictable because they played Clark Atlanta, then they played, I think, Allen, Elizabeth City, and here they go 4-0, and I'm just thinking, like, they haven't played anybody.
Right, that's true.
And I caught so much heat from the Livingstone people, from the Livingstone posters on Twitter. It was brutal. I mean, I was taking shots, and I'm just sitting here like, man, like, I can't wait till Saturday. And Livingstone, like, scores nothing against Virginia Union at home. And it was like somebody just, like, whoever left, whatever Panther left the locker room basically turned off the lights. And you didn't hear anything from Livingstone the rest of the season. They got shut out 3 times. The rest of 2 additional times the rest of the season. It was really bad. And I was really surprised by the offense. I thought they would do a little bit better against softer competition again. But you're right. I think Virginia Union stole their soul or something, because that was it. It was lights out.
I keep going back to the visual of watching that game, and I'm not gonna lie, I was genuinely kind of excited to watch that game. And when I cut the game on, I didn't see any kind of crowd there whatsoever. And I'm like, where's the crowd? And it's almost like the crowd was like, I can't take the chance of going to see this game because if what happens like I think is what's going to happen, I'm just going to be disappointed. So I'd rather not go. And, I mean, I just really thought, hey, you're 4-0. You're going – I mean, Virginia Union had just lost. So that was a bad thing because you're like, you got a team that is kind of upset that they just lost. But you're going into this game where this is a program changing event. I mean, if you just play close, it'll wake people up and people will, but it didn't happen. Nobody showed up and literally on the field, on the sidelines. And it was just, that was
you could have played one of the WWE soundtracks with like the King and Jerry Lawler in the background for that game.
Yeah.
It was just brutal.
Yeah, it was. Oh my goodness. All right. So as we get into, let's talk about the. I mean, I don't know. There's much to talk about in terms of the championship game. Obviously, Bowie. From the get-go, first possession for Fayetteville State defensively. They get the scoop and score, and it's just off from there. It was probably a closer game than I think we thought it might be. It was at one point it was 14-7. Fayetteville was driving, thought they might have an opportunity to tie it up, fumbled or made some sort of either an interception or a fumble. Something happened, a turnover regardless, and they gave the ball back to Bowie, and eventually, Bowie would put them away, win 23-7. As we look back on the season, gentlemen, an unbeaten season, I believe it's the first in Bowie State history, 10-0 regular season, 11-0 going into the playoffs. Is there a game that you can think back on and say, this is the game when you kind of either knew that this was going to be a special year for Bowie State, or maybe a game where you thought their season turned? I'll go AD. You start first, and then we'll go to Kris.
I talked with Coach Wilson about that in an interview that we had this year, and I asked him that very same question. When was it that he knew that this team was going to be good, or going to be that team? Because there's always that point in time throughout the season that that's going to be good. And I believe, and I don't have it in front of me, I believe he said it was either I believe he said it was the Winston-Salem State game. There was a point in time in the second half of that Winston-Salem State game where they had to do a gut check and grind, and they just did what they needed to do, and that's when he knew that this was that team. So I'm going to just go with Coach on that one. And if I got the game wrong, I apologize about that, but that's what I'm going to go with, Brian.
What about you, Kris?
I think that game was probably Shaw, because you want to talk about things that never happen in football. Bowie State was down to Shaw with 2 minutes left in the game, and they blocked not only one punt attempt but 2 punts in order to win that game. It was an epic collapse of colossal proportions of what happened. And Shaw never really lived that down in terms of, just how bad it was. But to me, it was okay, this defense is for real and the special teams is for real. And it just seems like they're going to find a way to win no matter what. They were finding just so many different ways to win over the season. But when I look back and I looked at that Shaw game, and they just hung in there to the very last minute, where most teams would probably just say, throw their hands up and say, well, we'll try again next week. I think that was the game to me.
Yeah, that game was pretty outrageous to be down 13 with about 5 minutes to go. And like you said, not only get one block punt, but then to come back and get a second one. You hear teams talk about being a little lucky sometimes. But obviously there's that phrase about luck, when preparation meets opportunity. And I really, it takes those kind of plays to have an unbeaten season. Winston-Salem, they're down at halftime, 13-9, and they come back and win that game 23-13. Tie ball game against Virginia State at halftime, 7-7. They go on to win 24-14. And then, of course, obviously, the beating that they put on Virginia Union, I thought that was – I think that's the game for me where I woke up and realized, okay, Bowie's a legitimate contender, because I thought Virginia Union kind of had their most complete team offensively. But, they had a passing game. Obviously, the running game wasn't as strong this year, but that's probably more teams focused in on who they had to stop. Everyone knew, okay, we got to focus in on Tobias Taylor. But it's like this year they had a passing attack. They had, a little bit better passing game. But, yeah, for them to put the beating there 52-17, that was just unreal. So that's the game for me that that light bulb went off. An interesting conversation we had, guys, as it relates to the CIAA and the championship model, and even the SIAC, where Miles won over Albany State. It had to do. We had an interesting conversation earlier in the week about the television and availability and the streaming that went into this broadcast, and just the whole season in general. Just to set it up, the CIAA all season through their CIAA Sports Network had been making games available online through the various schools' websites. Every school had to basically stream their home package, and there was no charge to do that. Conversely, the SIAC was primarily requiring people to go through Flow Sports, a company that was charging people for a subscription, whether it be monthly or a yearly subscription service, in which you get the whole Flow Sports package, but you get these various SIAC games. And there were a few SIAC games that were also being cast on ESPN. I think it was maybe a handful. And then, so that's what you've been dealing with all season, but then you get into the championship games, and the SIAC goes with a broadcast that can be picked up on ESPN3, so no one had to pay for it. And then the CIAA goes with a $9.99 fee, along with their broadcasting it on Aspire TV, which is a national but regional in the North Carolina, Virginia area broadcast network. And so we had a good discussion or interesting conversation. So I think it was which one of you two brought up the topic first, AD, or was that you, Kris?
I did the initial tweet, and then Kris. I know Kris was one person who responded. A couple other people responded to the tweet on that. But I picked up off of somebody. The SIAC actually took a shot at the CIAA.
I saw that.
That the game was free, and I just kind of piggyback off of that and retweeted it, threw my 2 cents in on it.
So, I mean, just in general, what was your take on the way that we talked about it on the last pod we did, but I mean, just kind of maybe short form it. What was your general thought on charging versus not charging for the championship game, and then just the way it was, just the streaming thing in the whole season?
Well, I'll start off with it. First of all, I do not agree with charging for the stream, charging the end user, be it the consumer, for the streams. I understand the quote unquote theory behind it, because most of these schools think that charging for their stream is going to, giving the stream away for free is going to cut down on ticket sales. But you both know that the people who are watching online are not local fans. These are Bowie State fans who live in Chicago now, or they're in Dallas. These are people who can't get to the game, because you know as well as I do, if you can get to an HBCU game, go watch your alma mater, go watch a local HBCU, you're going to be at the game just for the atmosphere. You'd much rather be at the game than watch it on TV. The people who are watching it online are people who cannot readily get to those games. So your ticket sales are not suffering because of this. I brought up the point that SIAC was pretty much shut out of the not only the national rankings but the regional rankings all year, and I wondered if that was because people weren't watching them because you had to pay Flow Sports $12.99 or $125 a year to watch most of your SIAC teams, whereas the CIAA had 3 teams in the regional rankings all year long. You had Bowie State, and then you had a Virginia Union team that was receiving votes nationally and even made to the top 25 at one point in time throughout the year, because they were getting the exposure. So that's kind of my take on it, but I personally do not think that any of these need to be charged unless you have some type of value added package to go with charging me $5.99, $9.99, whatever it is. I'll defer to you, Kris.
I mean, I think the issue with charging, so the CIAA schools don't charge during the regular season, and the how good the stream is really depends on the school. And so, like Virginia Union, for example, their streams has gotten better over the last couple of years, but it's still barely watchable. Whereas if you go to like Fayetteville State, Winston-Salem State, those are the streams that are like really solid, and they have a good like radio or announcers to go along with it. Shaw has gotten better. Bowie State's gotten much better. And so I think the schools see the value in the streams. Now, I agree with AD. I think, people, that aren't able to go to the games are alums who are interested in watching their team. And then I've had other interested people from other conferences want to watch the game, and having that free stream is the way for other conferences to really take in those games and see, oh, is Bowie State for real? Is Virginia Union for real? Et cetera, et cetera. I thought the SIAC kind of going after the CIAA for the championship game, they really didn't have that much of a leg to stand on if they're talking about the price of something, because they've been charging all year, and the CIAA only charge for one game, and that's the game that the conference itself put on. So to make sure that it's a high quality feed. So I just kind of chuckled at that. Because I don't know who's going to be. Not everybody's going to pay $10 to do a stream, and they'll either listen to it on the radio or they're going to check out another game.
Yeah. Go ahead, AD.
I was going to say, and I'm curious, Kris and Bryan. I wonder, what the numbers were as far as that CIAA pay-per-view stream versus the SIAC free stream. But on the flip side, I'm also curious as to what the numbers were for the Flow Sports throughout the season versus what the CIAA numbers were pulling in on their free stream. But, of course, we probably never know what those true numbers really are.
Oh, no, those are protected. I mean, they're not giving up. I mean, it sounds crazy. They're not giving up that information, even though I've maintained it would be smart of them to publish some sort of numbers and spin it any kind of way you want to spin it, so that it lets people, because sometimes people don't want to be front runners. People don't want to try something new if nobody else is trying it. Oh, no one else is watching. Why should I watch? So it's like,
if I'm Joe with a insurance agency, I'm not going to call out any specific names, but if I'm Joe with the insurance agency and I want to advertise on the CIAA network or Shaw's network or Tuskegee's network or whatever, I need to know what kind of numbers that I'm getting for my dollar.
Exactly. How many people are watching? How long are they watching? I mean, it's old school radio data would be applicable for the streaming purposes and the streaming numbers. And, they don't want to publish that. They don't want to – it's like this big protected dirty secret, that runs out there. I mean, you hear – and I mean, it's all crazy because, I trust me, I know that the numbers are there and they're probably less than what you think, but still they're numbers. Put some even if you just spun everything based on percentages, you do something to let people know what we did from one year compared to the other. But then the other factor, like you said, if you're gonna charge people, well, I mean, there's a way for all these schools to generate revenue, but I don't know if everybody is set up to do that. That's a whole nother conversation. But I'm not opposed to charging people. I don't know if charging $9.99, especially when you haven't charged all year. And, Kris, you tell me, did you see any advertising leading up to the championship game that they were going to be charging $9.99?
I did not, and I was very surprised that they were charging $9.99. I think you're dead on right about that.
Exactly. Why would you go into your championship game with a shock? And they let people know on the Saturday of. It's like, let people know maybe the Monday before or 2 weeks before. Do something on that. Hey, we're you can watch the stream online. There will be a fee to watch it. Blah blah blah. And maybe if you order the stream will send you a program from the championship. I don't know. I'm adding in extras, whatever.
That's that value. That's that value added. I see it, Bryan.
Thank you. Or you get a pennant. You get a pennant for the championship team. I don't know. Just something that'll make people wanna buy the stream. But you can't just spring it on them 6 hours before kickoff. Hey, guess what? It's $9.99 to charge. And so I thought the shots fired by the SAAC was beautiful because it was like, oh, you guys spent no advertising on this, so why spend? And they were just like, hey, or you could watch it for free. I was like, wow, just across the bow, off the top ropes, just so. As it relates to the streaming, as Kris, as you interact or talk to coaches, fans, has there been any? I mean, you mentioned the fact that there's some streams in stadiums, obviously, where there are better than others. But in terms of the value added, and I think AD, you just brought up a good point that I didn't even consider. The fact that it's free may have helped with rankings and things of that nature. What are you hearing from on the CIAA landscape regarding it?
I mean, I think the streams are great for they're great for like recruiting and that kind of thing. I think, but I really haven't talked with coaches about that, and I really haven't talked with administrators about it either. I'm actually kind of curious now that you mention it. I would say that, like, the fact that I can stream the game and stream for free means that as a columnist, I could basically turn into the Red Zone channel and basically watch multiple games at once. And I think a lot of players, like, they will like retweet what I will post on there because it benefits them, and it actually gets a lot of people looking at what the conference is doing. So I think charging.
Which you do a great job of.
Thank you. I would say if they charge per game, there's no way I'm paying. I would hope that somebody gives me a cheat code to watch the game for free or something, because I'm not paying $10 a game, $5 a game to watch all those games. It's just not going to happen.
That's not in the DQFootball.com budget there, Kris. That
And I'm going to take that one step further. Bryan, how many days were we on the road covering the game or broadcasting the game, and we've got 3, 4, 5 laptops up in the press booth and 2, 3 phones, and each one of them has a different game up and as so-and-so's linked to update the scores, and we're going back and forth with this. How much fun is it? Just like Kris said, we created our own Red Zone channel or HBCU channel, as I would like to appropriately call it. You know, our red, black, and green channel. Let's use that one. But
I gotta admit, one of the I was gonna say one of the most fun weekends we had, obviously, was the weekend where you had the upsets in the you had the A&T and Bethune losing. You had we were looking at the results of Shaw and
A&M Jackson State was playing that weekend.
There was 4 or 5 interesting games all across from D2 to FCS that were all going on around the same time. And it's like, you know, your scoreboard watching, live stat watching, live feed watching. I mean, that's when football is sometimes its most fun, but that's because we've been conditioned through the whole red zone lifestyle and sports bars and stuff like that. It's like it's time for black college football to move to that level, but we got to get the people who in these athletic offices to kind of get, they got to figure out. Anyway, I don't want to go there. Was there anything that we missed or that we didn't talk about in the discussion there that we were talking about as it relates to the streaming from both conferences? Anything that we missed there?
I think we covered it all.
I think, I agree with him. I think we about hit it all. You know,
so let me ask
your
this.
Last point was good. We just got to do better.
So let me ask this: as it relates to the playoffs coming up, do we know, are these games broadcast or will they be available online?
They generally have been, and so I would expect that yes, it will be online. Yes.
We just don't know where yet. We just don't have that, I guess.
Usually,
the individual schools will do it.
Yeah, the home team's website has usually done them in the past.
Okay, I got you. All right.
In the early rounds, I believe the NCAA takes over in the regional championship. If I remember correct, yeah, you may correct me on that, Kris. You may have more knowledge than me on that, but I believe that's when the NCAA takes over the streams.
Yeah. No, the semifinal round is when they generally.
Oh, it's the semifinals. Okay.
Yeah.
All right, so let's get into Super Region 2 is where we have the SIAC champion Miles. It's also where we have the CIAA champion Bowie State. Valdosta State is number 1 in the region. Lenore Rhine from the SAC is the 2 seed taking on Miles. Miles presumably is the 7 seed. Although it's interesting, they only really list the top 4 seeds on the playoff bracket. So I guess we don't really know officially whether Miles is the 7. We just know that they're not a top 4, and they're taking on Lenore Rhine. That is a 2 p.m. Eastern time kickoff. Bowie is the 3 seed hosting Carson Newman at 1 o'clock Eastern time. And then, you could potentially see either a Lenore Rhine Bowie State matchup, a Miles Bowie State matchup would be beautiful. And then on the other side of the bracket, you have Wingate is the 4 seed, and they host West Florida. So let's do this. Let's start, since we got Kris here with us, let's start with the Bowie State Carson Newman game. And I thought as I was going through some of the notes on Carson Newman, some things that stood out for me, and then I'll kind of toss it over to you, Kris, some things that stood out of Carson Newman. Carson Newman has not been to the playoffs since 2015. The last time they were there, they played Valdosta State, lost 61-59 was that score. They actually have very little history recently against ranked CIAA schools. In fact, they haven't beaten, the last time they faced a ranked CIAA team was 2005 when they beat Shaw. Shaw was 25th in the country at that time, back in 05. 45-24 they beat them. They have not beaten a ranked playoff team since 2013 in the first round. So that actually advantaged Bowie State, who I believe they are, what is their ranking now, Kris or AD, 10th or 11th?
11 in the nation. Of course, we know they're number 3 in their respective region.
Right, and number 1 in our polls. So Carson Newman, 8-2 record, currently on a 4-game winning streak, averaging 40 points a game, allowing 20 points a game, or just under 21 rather. The interesting stat that I came across that I circled was that Carson has the number 4 rushing offense in the country in Division II, 316.9 yards per game. If you compare that to Bowie with a ranked 27th in the country, 216 yards per game, I thought that was one of the interesting stats. And then one more stat, and I'll toss it over to you, Kris. Bowie State happens to be the only team in this entire region that has a top 10 offense and defense in terms of scoring. They 42.5 a game on offense, which is number 10 in Division II, and the defense allowing 15.5, which is number 9. They are the only team in the region that has a top 10 in both offense scoring and defensive scoring. What stood out as you looked into this game?
I actually listened to the Carson Newman Tusculum game last week, and those are very fierce rivals. And the thing that stood out to me was the fact that Carson Newman knew that running against Tusculum was going to be tough because Tusculum has a really good front seven, and they opted to go to the air and pass the ball. That's something that we don't see very often that Carson Newman does because they are a veer, I think it's like a split veer option type system, and they have run that for like decades now. So they certainly have some capabilities to kind of like mix it up and keep teams off balance. And, you know, Carson Newman, the only two teams they lost to were the two teams ahead of them in the playoffs, Wingate and Lenore Ryan.
Right.
So, you know, Bowie certainly has a bit of a challenge there because they don't give up a lot of yards rushing. It's around 100 yards a game. The problem, I think, is just that if you think about in recent history, keep in mind that Carson Newman played Virginia Union last year at Virginia Union, and they kind of just wore down the Panthers, and that's what they really tried to do. So, you know, Bowie has a very, very good front defensive line, you know, with Joshua Pryor on that line. I just wonder if the option offense is going to be, you know, keeping them a bit off balance and how they will address that.
AD, what about you? What kind of thoughts do you have on this matchup?
Looking at a couple of the numbers, Brian. First thing I look at is third down percentage, Brian. Carson Newman is 51% clip on third down compared to Bowie's only 35% on third down. That's 61 for 120, whereas Bowie is 53 for 150. Brian, when you're converting 51% of your third downs, that means you're getting good yardage on first and second down. You're getting third and short, third and threes, third and twos. One reason they're doing that is they're averaging 5.5 yards per rush, almost 6 yards per rush, Brian. So 5.9 yards per rush. So they're getting second and short, third and short, so that they can convert on third down. So Bowie has got to be able to put Carson Newman in third and 5 or more in order to be successful. That's number one. Number two, I look at red zone. Bowie is very respectable, 78% in the red zone, 40 for 51, including 33 touchdowns, Brian. As good as that is, Carson Newman is at a 93% clip in the red zone, 38 for 41, 33 touchdowns, Brian.
Say that number again.
They are 38 for 41 in the red zone.
Okay.
33 of that 38 is touchdowns, Brian. So those are numbers that are concerning to me if I'm a Bowie State Bulldog. Where does Bowie have the one advantage, though, Brian? They get out on you early. They get out on you often. You know, Bowie has scored 105 points in the first quarter, 142 points in the second quarter of games, whereas Carson Newman has scored 96 and 96. So if you're Bowie State, you need to get off to one of those big starts, get up on this team early, and force this team away from their running game. And that's what I'm looking at is what it's going to take for this Bowie State Bulldog team to beat Carson Newman.
I told you, AD, I've become a big fan of looking at the yards per play. And so the Carson Newman rushing. Now, we mentioned that 316.9 rushing yards in a game, but yards per play is really at 5.9, which is I think I'm surprised it's under 6. So, I mean, obviously that tells you, I think it tells you they run they got a lot of plays, but they run the ball a lot. So there's a lot of attempts rushing the ball, and so that yards per play number goes down a little bit. Bowie State's rush defense, their yard per play rush defense is 2.8. That's what they allow rushing, and part of that is that front. Now, like Kris kind of mentioned about being worn down, hopefully the depth will be there to, if those guys get tired up front, it can wear down on you. If the offense hasn't scored and it becomes one of these close ball games late in the fourth quarter, that might be a problem. If I recall, and you guys correct me, last year against West Alabama, Bowie got out to a lead on West Alabama and before West Alabama actually scored and made it a little bit closer than what the game was. Is that correct?
I think that's right. They did get out to a lead, and then West Alabama kind of made it a game, and they just kept, pushing forward, and then at the end, West Alabama still had a chance to win the game until they had that late interception. It was like a late 6-6.
Yeah, so that's the one. I think that has to be the blueprint again for the success, is getting out to a lead and with the anticipation that you might get worn down in the fourth quarter. You mentioned those 2 losses by Carson Newman. They lost to Wingate 30-28, and that was in week 2. Carson Newman actually had a 28-20 lead at the half, and then were essentially shut out in the second half. I mean, their defense gave up a field goal in the fourth quarter with about 9 minutes to go, and that was the field goal that got Wingate over, so there was no real scoring after that. So Wingate's defense actually stepped up. And then against Lenoir-Rhyne, they were just punched in the mouth early. I mean, Lenoir-Rhyne jumped out on them 16-0 in the first quarter, and they were just playing catch-up from that point. So, I don't think they, when you give up 16-0 to Lenoir, I think, isn't that what Lenoir did to Virginia Union? They jumped on them early in the first quarter.
Yeah, that was pretty bad. It was 21-0 at one point.
Right, yeah. So I mean, there's a team right there that, and we'll get to talking about Miles in a second, but that's one of those things that Miles has to be aware of. I just think it's interesting when and AD, I don't know, did you pull up the info from the Versus Sports Simulator yet on this game?
Yeah, keep talking and I have it for you.
Okay, well, what I was gonna go to and just mention, I was just gonna mention it. I think it's interesting when I looked into Carson Newman's history. I mean, here's a team that with a very deep, proud, tradition-rich football program. I mean, they were a NAIA powerhouse for many years. They won 5 national championships at that level. When they moved to Division II in the 90s, they went to the championship 3 times. They lost those years. I think it was 96, 98, and 99, including a 4 overtime championship game. I somewhat remember that game. For some reason, I don't know why I remember that 4 overtime game in a championship, but yeah, I sort of remember that. They've won 21 SAC championships in their time in the conference. So I mean, it's a tradition-rich program, and I think what Damon Wilson has done for Bowie over the last decade is one of those things that, who knows? I mean, Bowie obviously the CIAA is rich in history with a lot of the Virginia schools, but I think he's sort of setting Bowie up to be a powerhouse for the next decade plus. And so I just find it interesting that you've got sort of a new what's the word I'm looking for? Maybe a new blood versus dare I say, a blue blood. Ooh, Anyway, did you pull up that info yet, AD?
Yes, I have, because you rambled.
All right. So what? Yeah, I tried to. I tried to ramble as long as I could there. What do we? In terms of the spread and prediction, let's kind of go. Let's go around the horn here. Let's go with the let's see what the computer thinks first, and then we'll get our human reaction to what the computer simulator thinks.
All right. And the simulator does not like Bowie. It has Carson Newman with a win probability of 70%, with a predicted score of 37-29. Carson Newman Eagles. The Versus Sports Simulator gives Carson Newman an A rating on its power to a B rating for Bowie. They give Carson Newman an A rating on their offense and an A- on their defense. Bowie State's offense and defense are a B+ and a B respectively. Carson Newman, just a couple of the other numbers, versus 500 teams that are 500 or better. Of course, Bowie is 4-0. Carson Newman is 1-2. Versus in the last 5 games, Carson Newman is 4-1. Of course, Bowie is 5-0, having not lost. Best win for Bowie State is Virginia State. For Carson Newman is West Florida. Worst loss for Carson Newman is Wingate. So those are your basic numbers right there, Brian and Kris. Last one, opponents' records.
Yes, that's my favorite one right there. That's my favorite one.
For Bowie State, opponents' records was 45-67. For Carson Newman, 54-55. One game below 500.
Jeez.
Definitely a stronger schedule.
All right, so let's go around the horn here. Kris, we'll start with you. You have a prediction. How do you see this game going?
The computers say a lot of things, but I also think that Bowie State at home is really tough, and I do expect them to pull this one out. But I don't think it's going to be a popular opinion. But I do think, and I do believe that Bowie State can win this game.
All right. So we got Bowie State. You got one in the win column for Bowie. AD, what about you?
Brian, we've had this problem on our show in the past. Do we go with our head or do we go with our heart? And you and I have had that debate, and sometimes it's came and bitten us in the you-know-what. But I'm going – both my head and my heart says Bowie State is going to win this game. They're going to go up early. They're going to go up big. They're going to jump out 14-0, 17-0 in the first quarter. And if Bowie could jump out to that type of lead, they're gonna negate what Carson Newman likes to do, and that's run the ball, because Carson Newman won't be able to take that time off the ball. They're gonna get a couple offensive touchdowns, and then that Bowie defense is gonna get a turnover early that's gonna set up a touchdown if it's not a scoop and score or a pick six. So that's why I think Bowie's gonna get up early, and they're gonna have to get up early if they're gonna win this game, Brian. So I'm picking Bowie, and I'm picking Bowie in a route.
Oh, you're going route. What is route? 2-touchdown route? Is that what we say a route? Does that qualify?
At playoff time, double digits is a route. Anything double digits is a route.
Anything double digits, right? Well, look, in the playoffs. I wish I could find somewhere that I could take the points with Bowie, because I would gladly take those. What was it, the 7 or 8 points? I would gladly take those and take Bowie on the money line if I could. I think this is a very good, solid team. I don't know if they are. I don't know. You put it like this. I go back to what I saw live against Valdosta State. And for those guys who returned, I think they saw what type of speed and what they needed to play with in order to be at that level. And I think they've been that has been with them all year, losing to Valdosta State. Now, we have to wait to see what next week looks like, but I think definitely this is a win for Bowie State. So yeah, I would take the points, take the money line. I'd try to get rich for a little bit for the nice Christmas break coming up. But yeah, I'm riding with Bowie here. So I think we got a clean sweep here on Bowie to win this weekend over Carson Newman, which sets up an interesting matchup. Will Bowie play Lenore-Ryan as the 2 seed, or will they play the SIAC champion Miles Golden Bears, who advanced into the playoffs? What they call it, earned access, I guess is what we call that. Is that the right terminology?
Yeah, earned access. It's not automatic qualifier. They earned access.
Right. So, now in terms of ratings and conferences, the SIAC does rate as the 4th of the 4 conferences in the region.
Correct.
Yeah. So look, they've got an uphill climb. I mean, they're playing an 11-0 Lenore-Ryan. When I went digging into the numbers, I'll tell you what is interesting about this, and I think this will be a low-scoring defensive ball game because you've got 2 teams that are, in terms of their defense, both teams are in the top 25 total defense, but both of them are stingy with the run. Lenore-Ryan is number 6 in the nation rush defense, only giving up 77.1 yards per game. Miles is number 11 with giving up 85.7 yards per game. So, and conversely, that's what both teams like to do. I mean, Miles likes to run the ball. They've got a nice little stable of backs. Lenore-Ryan runs the ball. They've got 3 different backs that have run about 500 yards this year each. So it'll be interesting to see whose run defense shows up. Total defense-wise, both of them are allowing about 4.63, 4.74 yards per play. Miles actually rates as the better total defense with they're ranked number 13th in the country, and Lenore-Ryan is number 23. But it's the offense. It's the offense that separates these 2 teams, guys. Lenore-Ryan's offense, just in total offense, 442 yards, but their rushing offense is number 8 in Division II. I think I was mentioning what Carson Newman I mentioned was number 4 in the country. Yeah, Lenore-Ryan is number 8. And so that's what Lenore-Ryan does well. I think if we had a chance, if you had a chance to watch the game against Virginia Union, that was a game that was kind of what the rest of their season has been like for this team. The one key stat that came across, Kris, that was most interesting as it relates to Lenore-Ryan, well, actually there's 2 things, but one of them had to do with their red zone attempts. Now, Miles has been in the red zone something like 46 times heading into the SIAC championship game, right? 46 times they've been in the red zone. They actually scored 23 times. That's just 23 scores. And that was pretty good for the conference. I mean, it was actually, it was almost twice as many opportunities as what Albany State had had. But compared to Lenore-Ryan, a team who'd been in the red zone 53 times this year, scored 47 times, and had 40 touchdowns. So 40 of the 47 scores were touchdowns in 53 appearances. Unreal. That's the problem for Miles. You cannot let Lenore-Ryan get into the red zone. If they get in the red zone, you're in trouble. What are your thoughts on this matchup, Kris?
Wait, did you say Miles got into the red zone like 40-something times and only scored 23 of those times?
Yes, which for the SIAC was actually Let me see. Let me find it here. Red zone. I had it all written out. Yeah.
I've got
it was
39 for 46, Brian.
You got what?
I was about to say
39 for 46. I'm on the Miles website right now.
Oh, okay, yeah. Okay, I'm sorry.
46.
Right. I was combining. I was looking at 2 different stats. Yeah.
Opponent.
Yeah. Okay. 36. Well, what I had going into the SIAC was 36 of 46. So obviously, if they're including the 3 touchdowns from this past weekend, then it'd be 39 of 49. Yeah.
Okay, that makes a little bit more sense. I was just
thinking,
wow,
yeah. My apologies.
That's it?
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
yeah. Exactly.
So with Lenoir-Rhyne, what's interesting is that they're very difficult to pass against. They have a gentleman, Kyle Duggar, that is on NFL's radars as a senior. And so, he's kind of all over the field. It's very difficult to pass against him and their secondary. And so, I think Lenoir-Rhyne knows that they would need to key on the rushing game to slow Miles down and force him to pass. I mean, I think the recipe is kind of simple. And Daniel Smith is very, very good quarterback for Miles. And so, Miles kind of reminds me a little bit of what Tuskegee was a few years ago when they got to, the regional final. I just kind of wonder, can they keep this game relatively close? Because Lenoir-Rhyne is known to score in a lot of bunches. So it's an interesting matchup.
Yeah, definitely. AD, your thoughts?
I like to look at the numbers. Miles' third down conversions, 37%, 55 of 148 on the season. Lenoir-Rhyne, 50%. They're 72 of 144 on third down. 2 other numbers that stick out at me, fellas. Penalties. Miles has to play mistake-free. There's no doubt about it. Miles has to play mistake-free. Miles is averaging 70 yards, almost 71 yards per game in penalty yardage, whereas Lenoir-Rhyne is only averaging 51 yards per game. Those 30 yards will make a difference in a game like this. They're going to have to remain mistake-free in order to be competitive in this game. Miles is going on the road for this game. The crowd should not intimidate Miles. Lenoir-Rhyne is averaging 37,000 people at home for their home attendance.
Wait a minute. How many?
37,000 is the average home attendance.
Sure it's not 3,700?
37,000.
Wow. Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry. Excuse me. That's a total attendance. The average is 6,000 at home.
All right. That's still pretty good for D2.
Yeah, the average is 6,000 at home. But, Brian, Miles averages 5,000 at home and 6,700 on the road. So, playing in a hostile environment should not affect Miles because they're used to having such big crowds away from home. That's why I bring that number up, Brian. They are used to playing in front of 6,800 people on the road. This team's averaging 6,100 at home. Reason I say sometimes you're used to playing against smaller crowds and large crowds may intimidate you on the road. Miles is so that would not be a factor.
Question for you, AD, as an Alabamian, I don't know what the right word is there. Will fans from Fairfield, Alabama, around Miles and the surrounding area, will they travel all the way over to I believe
Lenore
Ryan's in the Charlotte area for this contest.
Yeah, yes, they will. First of all, you've got a decent fan base in the Atlanta area that would travel over to that Charlotte area. Let's also remember something. Coach Reginald Ruffin, former defensive coordinator at Tuskegee, still has a lot of followers from Tuskegee. There will be a group of, and I know this is hard to believe, there will be a group of Tuskegee fans who will travel from the Atlanta area over to Charlotte, North Carolina, just because it's Coach Ruffin playing. So you're going to have some people. You're going to have some people who are going to make that trek, Brian, from Atlanta over to the Charlotte area, and you're talking a 7-hour drive probably from Birmingham to Charlotte.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, a lot of people are off work next week, Brian. This is the perfect weekend for people to travel. A lot of people go on vacation after Friday. Good weekend to take off and follow your football team. I expected a fair amount of miles, purple and gold, to be in that crowd.
One of the things, and I didn't know this about Lenore Ryan until I looked it up, so I won't try to act like I did. Their head coach, second-year coach Drew Cronick, he is currently 23-2 in his 2 years. Last year they were 12-2 after 3 years of not making the playoffs. In his first year they went 12-2, lost to Valdosta State in the third round of the playoffs, where Valdosta State was beating everybody last year, but they lost 61-21 in the third round. I believe that would have been the regional finals probably, I guess. 1, 2, 3. Yeah, so they lost in the regional finals, but they were 12-2. I think they lost the first game of the season, then won 12 in a row, and then lost the last game. But anyway, think about that, and then combine them with being unbeaten this year. And in 2 years, he is already, percentage-wise, the winningest coach in the long history of football at Lenore Ryan. That by win percentage, not total games, but just in terms of win percentage, he's already sitting at number one. And so, here's a program that they were the D2 finalists back in 2013. I just thought that was real interesting that you've got a second-year coach that is doing what he's doing, and then you've got Reginald Ruffin on the other side, who, a decade at Miles. This is the 4th SIC championship. Second year he's gone to the playoffs. He's sort of, I guess Miles might be the team of the decade in the SIC, or they could easily make an argument for being team of the decade in the SIC. I thought it's just an interesting comparison of two coaches and kind of what they've built heading into this ball game. So I really do hope the Miles faithful shows up and shows out, because they're going to need every ounce of spirit and positive vibes as they get into this game. All right, AD, it's that time. You pulled up, I know you got the sports simulator, the Versus Sports Simulator up. There you go. I know you got it pulled up. So let's go and this brings up another topic another time, but we got to figure out why the computers don't like our HBCUs. But anyway, that's just something to think about, because we pointed that out.
Because we don't beat the PWI conferences, Brian. I'll go ahead and answer that one, and I'm pretty sure Kris will agree with me over there.
All right. All right, so let's go to let's figure out what our prediction and what our score from the Versus Sports Simulator says, AD.
With a win probability of 93%, the Lenore Ryan Bears over the Miles College Golden Bears by a score of 40-14.
Oof.
Yeah. Overall rating, Lenore Ryan gets a A-, where Miles gets a C+. Power, offense, and defense, Lenore Ryan gets an A in all three categories, whereas Miles gets a C+, a C, and a B- respectively in all three of those categories. We know Miles was 8-2 overall. 9-2 overall. Lenore Ryan 11-0. Miles was 4-1 versus teams 500 and better. Lenore Ryan was 3-0. Miles was 5-1 against teams that were less than 500. We know that one loss they had to Central State hurt that ranking, whereas Lenore Ryan hasn't lost all season, so we're not even going to discuss that. Best win for Miles, Albany State. We know that was a championship game, the CIAA championship game. Best win from Lenore Ryan was Wingate. Worst loss, I just mentioned it, the Central State loss was the worst loss. Largest margin of victory. Lenore Ryan beat St. Augustine's in a game that Kris had mentioned earlier by 61 points, whereas Miles beat Lane by 40. Miles' worst loss was to Missouri S&T by 28 points. And the last stat that you'd like to look at, Brian, opponents' records. For Miles, those opponents were 44-67. For Lenore Ryan, 52-66.
Okay, 52-66. Okay, well, all right, 40-14. Wow. So the computers all over Lenore Ryan. That's I don't know what's more shocking, the margin there, or the fact that the simulator thinks Carson Newman beats Bowie. All right, Kris, we'll start with you. What's your prediction? Can Miles keep it close? How do you see this one shaking out?
I mean, I think Miles might be able to keep it close, but I mean, I think about Missouri S&T is actually pretty decent team in the GOVC, and if they're losing like that to Missouri S&T, I'm afraid to even see what is going to happen on Saturday. I don't think Miles is going to be able to keep it that close for very long. So my pick is definitely going to be Lenore Ryan.
All right, AD, what do you think?
Yeah, I'm not going to lie to you, Brian. I'm going strictly with my heart on this one because my head tells me, right, like Kris, Lenore Ryan is going to blow Miles out. I'm going with my heart. Coach Ruffin is a good friend of mine. You know, we were both assistant coaches at the same time at Tuskegee. He was, of course, him in football, me in basketball. But the one category that you cannot plan for when you do these statistical analysis is turnovers, and that's exactly what Miles will have to do. They will have to take care of the ball, and they will have to create turnovers in order to neutralize Lenore Ryan. If that happens, Miles wins. Miles wins by 6.
For me, I think Daniel Smith has to have a good game. You know, one of the things I brought up is last year, Daniel Smith was a true dual threat quarterback last year, running and passing. This year, Miles has sort of relied on a triumvirate of running backs, and Daniel Smith has not run as much as he had the previous year. I think he needs to be that guy. He needs to be the one to sort of carry this team forward, and he has to be the most productive, most efficient offensive player that Miles has. And if he does that, I think they can get into this fourth quarter and have a shot. But I worry about the first quarter and a half, because like Kris pointed out, like I see, we've seen Lenore Ryan, they jump on you, and they jump on you in spurts, and you really have to stay in the ball game, and you almost got to be perfect for about a quarter and a half. Miles has to be perfect. They really need the kind of game like what they had in the championship game against Albany State. It just needs to be an ugly, slow down, run the ball, 0-0 until late in the first half, and somehow find a way to score. And then, okay, now let's go into the second half and see what we got. But I think if they go into halftime trailing by 10 or, God forbid, 2 touchdowns, I don't know if Miles can come back from that. So I don't think it'll be 40-14, but I'm going to go, I hate to do it, but I'm going to go Lenoir-Rhyne by maybe 10 with the thought that Miles keeps it close and maybe he gets away from him. But, that's my hope of hopes. So we'll see. So the winner of those 2 games, Lenoir-Rhyne versus Miles and Bowie State versus Carson Newman, will play on the 30th of November in one of the 2 semifinals. Kris, the last thing we wanted to kind of talk about while we got you here is there's been big discussion here on the black college football landscape regarding the Black College National Championship. Obviously, we understand it really is a mythical title, and obviously, despite what the Celebration Bowl has sort of meant the last 4 years, or just so happened that the team that won that game was crowned the Black College National Champion. I heard a good podcast from Donald Ware. Anybody who listens to Box to Row or his daily podcast, he brought up a great point that if you don't have Tennessee State and you don't now if you don't have Hampton, you really can't have a true Black College National Championship scenario. Even though neither team is having a great year in terms of, being what a MEAC or SWAC team is having record-wise, if they're not able to sort of, when they have a great season, if they're not able to match up against one of these, then you really can't call the Celebration Bowl the national championship game. And this year, I don't think you can do it because probably your 2 best teams, Florida A&M, who is not eligible to play, and Bowie State, who is in Division II, are playing. They're not going to be in this Celebration Bowl. So my question to you, Kris, as it relates to Bowie State and a Division II team and being the Black College National Champion, what does Bowie State have to do in your mind to be considered I don't know if I can know. I'll just say it. The consensus, that may be hard to do. But anyway, the consensus or considered the Black College National Champion, what would they have to do in your mind?
So there are some blueprints out there as to how Division II school like Bowie State could get to that point. I do think that they're going to have to win at least two playoff games to get there.
I agree.
Because Valdosta State is just such a juggernaut. I mean, can you really say? I think Valdosta can beat some of the MEAC, some of the top MEAC SWAC schools. So,
right.
I think if they get to Valdosta State in the regional final, I think that will probably be enough. I think that the blueprint for that would have really been, what Tuskegee or Winston-Salem State have done in the past to get to that point. But I think it's also pretty tough because you have Florida A&M who did so well but isn't eligible for the Celebration Bowl. You still got A&T, that's a really good team. South Carolina State's a really good team. And then you still got, Alcorn and the winner of Grambling and Southern. So, for Bowie State, you got to go deep in the playoffs in order to get to that point.
I agree 100% with you. I think I told AD that we had this similar discussion. If Bowie State if they were to win 2, I might have to at least call them co-champs. And that's assuming Florida A&M beats Bethune-Cookman, which I'm expecting to happen this weekend in the Florida Classic. AD, as we've talked about it many times, what's your take and where do you stand these days on this topic?
First of all, I have to throw this. Out here. I am a true Rattler, so before people kick my butt for what I'm about to say, I am a true Rattler from Florida A&M University. But the path to Bowie being the consensus national champion, Fam has to lose to Bethune again this weekend.
Okay.
So that's why I had to throw that out there. Fam has to lose to Bethune.
God forbid if that were to happen. But anyway, go ahead.
Whoever comes out of the Southern Grambling game has to defeat Alcorn in the SWAC championship game.
Okay.
Then if those two happen, it really doesn't matter who comes out of the BAC because they're already damaged goods because they're the number 2 team. And Lord forbid if the BAC has that god awful 4-way tie that is a realistic It's a realistic possibility this weekend that there could be a 4-way tie. We only know only one of 2 teams can actually represent the BAC, but there could be a what do you call them? Coco champions? I mean, you know.
I think everybody gets one co. It'd be 4 teams with a co champion. But that has happened before in the MEAC. That's how crazy it is. The MEAC has had 3 co-champions before.
But
5. They had 1 year that they had 5, I think.
Oh my God.
All right, Kris, did everybody get a ring? You know, everybody gets a trophy society. Did everybody get a championship ring? And do you really wear that championship ring with pride, like some of the other ones you wear with pride? I'm sorry, I'm getting off my soapbox. You haven't been around me, Kris, but Bryan knows that once I get going, I will get going. But if those crazy scenarios happen, you have no choice but to make Bowie your national champion, and then Bowie doesn't have to win 2 games if that stuff happens. They just have to win this weekend, and all that other stuff happens, and you can crown them then.
What I find is one of the interesting, you know, and I like I said, I caught this from listening to Donald's podcast, is that there are people who there's a segment of people that seem to think that because FAMU self-imposed their sanction, this wasn't necessarily the NCAA or the MEAC that basically did not, you know, or that did this to FAMU. This was FAMU sort of self-sanctioning themselves and saying that this year we will not compete in the playoffs, which then the MEAC said, well, since you're not competing in the playoffs or eligible for the play, i.e. the Celebration Bowl, playoffs or bowl, then you won't be eligible to win the conference because the quote-unquote conference champion goes to the Celebration Bowl. Now, what's crazy about that, we're still going to count your wins and losses on everybody else's schedule, though. So that's why FAMU, you know, everyone else, in my opinion, is the representative going to the Celebration Bowl and not the true champion, especially if FAMU closes the deal. But there seems to be people who think, oh, FAMU should not be eligible to be the Black College National Championship this year because they cheated or they, you know, they're on suspension or they're on probation. You know, people who don't understand what happened and why it happened, you know, seem
none
to
of the
think
players who dress in green and orange
had anything to do.
Had anything to do with this self-imposed penalty.
Bingo.
Now, if that would have happened with players who are currently in their tenure there at FAMU, then you can make that argument.
Right. So I don't know. This interesting. It'll see. I kind of agree. Like I said, all of those scenarios need to happen. For me, I think it really is other than Alcorn, who's on the outside, kind of running near the third rail. I think it's really between FAMU and Bowie, and the furthest Bowie, and like you said, the 2 scenarios where it's happened before, Winston-Salem State, who went all the way to the national championship game, and then Tuskegee, who went to the regionals, correct? Regional finals?
No, that was actually I think it was 2007, and I think Tuskegee just played what was the Pioneer Bowl back in that time, at that point in time, because the year they went to the regional finals, they were not the consensus champion. I believe A&T was the consensus champion that particular year.
Oh, that was one of the years A&T had well, and see, that's another factor. Whenever you have a really strong FCS team or season like that one, you probably will have, among the and the thing is, you have, like, for example, we have a D1 and then we have a under D1 poll, and there are a few people who have polls similar to that, and then there are people who have the combined consensus poll, which, anyway, I don't, trying to compare the D2s to FCSs is really hard, even though we all know a team like Valdosta State would really they'd wreak havoc in the MEAC or maybe even the SWAC. It'd be interesting to see Valdosta on that level. All right, so I'll tell you what, Kris. No, go ahead. So you got to say something? AD?
I was going to say, I got one question for Kris. You may have thought about this, you may not have, Kris. Can you give us a quick top 5 in Division II, Kris? Who, if you were to vote in our poll, who would your 5 votes be for in D2?
I would probably say Bowie State would be number 1, Virginia State number 2, Miles number 3, Fayetteville State number 4, and then probably Virginia Union number 5.
All right. Very good, very good. No love for Savannah State, but that's okay. They'll be okay. They're gonna come back and wreak havoc on everybody next year, I'm sure. Like I sort of predicted they would this year.
I forgot about them. Yeah.
The SIAC East champion. So we've got 2 paper champions out there thus far.
Yeah. Well, makes for interesting times. Look, I'm gonna have some interesting. We're gonna have some interesting end of season discussions, because there definitely have been some really good stories, very strange stories this year, and we'll go from there. I don't know. Is there anything we missed, Kris? Anything that you wanted to pub or promote? We appreciate you hanging in and spending this time with us.
So, you guys had mentioned the biggest surprise in our CIAA.
Yeah.
I would probably say that my biggest surprise was the emergence of Emmanuel Wilson, who was a freshman running back from John C. Smith. And for the last couple of years, I've been kind of talking about how bad the JCSU running game was. And Kermit Blunt took over as offensive coordinator for this year. And if you know anything about him, he always finds really good running backs, and he kind of just, loves to run the ball. And that's kind of what you saw, in what was a 2-man race for offensive freshman of the year between him and Sidney Gibbs of Shaw. So I did want to mention that as my biggest surprise. JCSU won 4 games this year, which hasn't happened in some time. So I think that certainly deserves some recognition as well.
How about and I may have mentioned, I brought this up, and the AD and I had a discussion maybe a few weeks back, but how about just the level of running backs in the CIAA? I mean, with all respect to, Jamae Martin in the MEAC and Jordan Bentley in the SWAC. I mean, literally, when I think of the best crop of running backs, and they're like 5 or 6 guys, they're all in the CIAA. I mean, they really are. I mean, and outside, we're losing Tobias Taylor. He is probably, he smartly is going to enter the draft, I'm sure, and should be an NFL quality back. Who else? We lost Stevie Green. He's a senior graduating. Tyrell Freeman. He was a senior, correct? Redshirt graduating senior.
Yeah, he was a senior, and he got hurt really early in the season, so people really didn't hear much about him. But
his replacement.
Yeah. So he was the all-time leading rusher at Chowan, and definitely deserves that recognition.
Right. He's the all-time leading rusher, and then his replacement just comes in and is the leading rusher in the conference with a 300-yard game and probably at least one 200-yard game and another game which I think he was like
yards.
Yeah. So he had 291 game, 30 something another, and then he had one game where I think he was 197. He was like real close to 200. But anyway, 1,377 yards in 10 games, if that. I may have only played really truly 9 games, but it was an outstanding year. But yeah, the number of backs in the CIA makes for, I think that's the big story for next year, is to seeing whether these running backs can equal their success from this year, where we came into this year really only talking about Tobias Taylor and Stevie Green, and then all these other running backs pop up. And so it'll be kind of interesting to see what the off season and next season is like. All right. Well, that's we're gonna wrap it up with Kris. D2football.com is where the column is. Are you doing a column for the playoffs for this one, or are you doing an end of the season column? Okay, yeah, for sure. So
I'll do that too. Yeah.
Yeah. So that when that comes out, we'll make sure to tweet and talk about that, and maybe even kind of once all the playoffs are done, into the season, we'll maybe do another convo and kind of do some maybe superlatives. We'll do kind of a fun little superlative show, and we'll kind of get in some different people in and kind of compare and contrast who our superlatives are for the season. How that sound good?
Sounds great to me.
All right, Kris, we're gonna we haven't really taken a break, so if you've hung in there and listened this far, man, we appreciate you. We're gonna take a quick little break, come back, and AD, we got to talk quickly about the MEAC tiebreaker scenarios. The big weekend in the MEAC, Florida Classic's coming up, and it'll be a real short little segment, I promise, and then we will wrap this show up. So we appreciate Kris Ferguson, D2football.com. What's your Twitter feed again, Kris?
So I do Twitter and Instagram. It's at D2KFerg. If you follow me, it's a lot of fun on the weekend.
For sure. At D2KFerg, F-E-R-G. Definitely. He good stuff. Good follow on game days during this past season with Kris.
Make sure we get some good buoy stuff this week, Kris, because we definitely going to be following those buoy boards.
For sure. We definitely need to do that. So, all right, Kris, so we're going to take a break. We'll be back right after these words, and we're going to wrap it up with some MEAC playoff scenario talk right after these words. You're listening to the BCSN Sports Wrap. We'll be back right after these words.
Q Time is our classic Atlanta soul food restaurant located in the historic West End. Q Time Soul Food is a family business started by Fred and Christine Crenshaw. Come on in, relax, and sink your chops into our tantalizing, mouth-watering, distinctive soul food with a twist, the Q Time way. 1120 Ralph David Abernathy Boulevard, or call your order in at 404-758-2881. Do you miss your mama's cooking? Then come on down to Q Time, an Urban Passport member.
The real reason why I went after Comcast and Charter, it didn't have anything to do with my cable networks. It didn't. What happened was a gentleman wanted to do the Black College Sports Network in partnership with the HBCUs, and Comcast did not accept it, and that would have made a lot of money for these black colleges. Absolutely. And it would have educated the Black College Sports Network. This is what he wanted to do. That would have educated a lot of black kids. And when they didn't do that, That's when I came off the bench and said, okay, I'm going to light you up like a Christmas tree. Mm-hmm. Okay? That was the real reason why I got into it, was when I saw what happened with the Black College Sports Network, which I don't know. I just knew that these black, right? I knew that these black colleges were going to benefit, and these black kids were going to get the education that they deserved and not have to pay.
The Creole seasoning is a sodium-free and sugar-free blend that's versatile enough to put on anything. One of the first blends I developed more than 8 years ago, the Creole seasoning has an unmistakable aroma, a bold flavor, and a little heat for character. Every time I open one of these bottles, I hear trumpets and big band music.
It's like a loop machine. All around town, people trying to get down. It's like a loop machine.
This December 21st, the best in HBCU football will collide in Atlanta at the Celebration Bowl. MEAC versus SWAC. Champion versus champion. Only one team will rise above the rest and claim the coveted Celebration Bowl trophy. Come join the celebration at Mercedes-Benz Stadium this December. For more information, visit thecelebrationbowl.com.
All right, welcome back to the BCSN Sports Wrap. Bryan and AD here, and great conversation we had with Kris Ferguson, D2Football.com. And here we go, AD. The MEAC is coming down to its final weekend after this past weekend where North Carolina A&T just went roughshod over Bethune-Cookman. North Carolina Central lost. South Carolina State won. And Norfolk State, I think, was on a bye. So this is the scenario. These are the games this weekend. Okay, of course, we have the Aggie-Eagle Classic, or Aggie-Eagle Classic, I believe. That is a 1 p.m. Eastern kickoff in Greensboro, North Carolina. North Carolina Central traveling to North Carolina A&T. That game will be broadcast on ESPN3. We also have, at the same time, South Carolina State traveling to Norfolk State, 1 p.m. Eastern time, and senior day for those guys there. Then we have at 3:30 p.m. the Florida Classic, which will be broadcast on ESPN News. That's a 3:30 Eastern kickoff at a neutral site, Camping World Stadium in Orlando, Florida A&M versus Bethune-Cookman. So we kind of knew that based on whoever came out of the Bethune North Carolina A&T would sort of be in the driver's seat. And that is true. North Carolina A&T is in the driver's seat, but, you know, they are in the driver's seat in a lot of different scenarios here. And so we'll just kind of run through these. So North Carolina A&T controls its own destiny, okay? With a win over North Carolina Central in the Aggie-Eagle Classic, they clinch a berth to the Celebration Bowl for the, for the third year in a row, okay?
Yes.
An Aggies win coupled with a loss by South Carolina State to Norfolk State would give A&T the outright MEAC championship asterisk after it, because obviously I'm just going to leave it at that. Obviously, you know, the MEAC championship was technically decided this past Saturday in Tallahassee. But anyway, I move on. South Carolina State, they are still alive. They can win the MEAC championship asterisk outright and earn a trip to the Celebration Bowl with a win and, underscore that, and a North Carolina A&T state loss. So South Carolina State, you know, has to beat Norfolk and A&T has to lose. So 2 things have to happen there for South Carolina State. Okay? Now, what if A&T and South Carolina State win? According to the conference, they will be declared co-champions, asterisk, with a 6-2 record. The Aggies would earn the Celebration Bowl bid based on the 22-20 win over the Bulldogs on November 2nd. Interesting enough here, AD, South Carolina State would still be eligible for an at-large berth in the FCS playoffs. That's interesting. I don't know how that would work. I don't know if South Carolina State has earned or garnered any attention at that level to even be considered for the playoffs, but that option is available with a win. If the Aggies and Bulldogs lose on Saturday, North Carolina A&T would be declared the co-champions, asterisk, with, get this, with South Carolina State and Norfolk State, who all would have a 5-3 record, and North Carolina A&T would clinch a berth to the Celebration Bowl. And that is because A&T would have the best record amongst the 3 tied teams. Of course, A&T, they beat both of those teams. Of course, A&T's only losses coming to Florida A&M and was it Morgan State. All right. Now, let's go one more. We're not done yet, AD. In the event that the unthinkable happens and Bethune-Cookman defeats Florida A&M for the 9th consecutive year, I can't even believe it's 9 years, and both A&T and South Carolina State lose, the Wildcats would share the title with, get this, North Carolina A&T, South Carolina State, and Norfolk State. And North Carolina A&T would get the Celebration Bowl bid because, guess what? They have a record of 3-0 among the 4 tied teams. Are you good with all that, AD? Does that make sense for you?
Bryan, A&T controls their own destiny, but they may be driving bumper cars by the time they get done with all this stuff, Bryan. That's the best way to put it, Bryan. This is utterly and totally ridiculous. Now, you talked about South Carolina State being eligible for an at-large bid. Correct, Bryan?
Correct.
Okay. South Carolina State is receiving votes in the national polls.
Oh, wow, really? Okay.
But they received a vote.
Okay.
Now, for FCS playoffs, they take 24 teams. You have 10 automatic bids. They actually do automatic qualifiers.
Mm-hmm.
And then there are 14 at-large bids. As you know, Bryan, the BAC does not get an automatic bid because they elect to send their champion to the Celebration Bowl in lieu of the automatic bid.
Mm-hmm.
So that's number one. Looking at the polls, Bryan, North Carolina A&T is ranked currently number 24 in the national polls. They would go to the Celebration Bowl.
Mm-hmm.
If both teams win. Florida A&M is currently ranked number 13, who is ineligible for the playoffs. So 2 teams are going to drop out of the polls in front of South Carolina State. It's not probable, but it is possible. We're just going to leave it at that. It is possible.
It is possible. Look, oh man, what scenarios? Let's as it relates to these matchups, the big question is, can North Carolina Central defeat A&T? Can A&T hold off Central? I'm just glancing here at the last 5 meetings, dating back to 2014. Last year, when A&T defeated North Carolina Central 45-0, it was probably the largest margin that any one team had over the other. Really, I'd say, I'm scrolling here, probably since, there was a North Carolina Central win in 2016 where they won 42-21. So that's 21 points. Prior to that, an A&T had a win of 28. Oh, that was the only other shutout. So the 3 shutouts four shutouts. There have been 4 shutouts in this millennia since 2000, right? They all belong to A&T. There was 01 where they won 22-0, 03 where they won 25-0, 2013 28-0, and then last year. All the other years, okay, especially so prior to last year, North Carolina A&T, they won in 2017. That was their unbeaten season, 2017. The 3 previous years, that's when North Carolina Central, under the Granville-Eastman era, where they beat, they won 3 consecutive years where they beat A&T. And I think a couple of those years, Central won the MEAC, and one of those years I think they even went to the Celebration Bowl. So it's not out of the realm of possibility that this game, that Central, I don't think this is the kind of Aggie team like the last 2 years. I really don't. I mean, they beat the brakes off of Bethune, but I'm just not convinced that that North Carolina A&T is that dominant that they're going to put a 45-0 spot on Central. Now, they may beat them, but I don't think it'll be that close. It'll be interesting to see where Central falls on this one. How do you see this one, Landon? Do you give Central any kind of chance in this, AD?
I give Central a chance because of their defense. There was a point in time where, if I remember correctly, Central had 4 or 5 games to start the season where their secondary had interceptions, including I can't remember the young man's name, but when I was at the game at Morgan State where he had 3 interceptions in the same game. So yeah, I give Central a chance because of their secondary. Would I put your money on them, Brian? I wouldn't even do that to you, though, Brian.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
I wouldn't do that. But yeah, they have a chance. Look at the Versus Sports Simulator, and I won't get deep into it, but the one that we like to look at, opponents' records for Central, 53-65. For A&T, 47-58. So Central has actually played a tougher schedule than A&T, believe it or not.
Yeah. So I would love it, love it if Central were to win this ball game. I don't know if they. I don't know if they will. I think that is I feel less confident about. I don't know that. I feel less confident about that happening of all the things that we've talked about. So, assuming that A&T wins that game, A&T will go to the Celebration Bowl as the MEAC representative. And I guess if the conference wants to claim them as champions, we'll call them champions asterisk, because they lost to the true champions, Florida A&M, in my opinion.
If their mama call them Clay, I'm going to call them Clay.
Oh, so you're going to call them champions. Okay, you do what you want to do. It's your prerogative. South Carolina State traveling to Norfolk State. Interesting ball game. Sports Simulator has a win probability of 63% in favor of South Carolina State by 5 points. Which would then elevate which would elevate South Carolina State to a record of 8-3. And like you said, it'll be interesting to see. They have an opponent's record of 47-57. They did beat Wofford. Now, the fact that they beat Wofford might be helpful to South Carolina State. It's just so big. How big was that loss to North Carolina A&T? I mean, that was a loss. I mean, that was a game that you had wrapped up. You had that game wrapped up. Anyway, but it'll be interesting to see if South Carolina State gets some votes and maybe sneaks their way in as an at-large. I doubt it. I mean, just by the fact that South Carolina State hasn't been – well, I don't know. Let me throw this at you. If South Carolina State's only 2 losses end up being to 2 top 25 ranked teams, essentially, which would be Florida A&M and North Carolina A&T, I mean, you might have to put them in as an at-large. They might be the last team in, but maybe they get in. I don't know. Who you got winning? Norfolk State, South Carolina State?
It's going to have to be a perfect storm for South Carolina State to get in. Just like with Biles, things are going to have to go right when it comes to South Carolina State. The right teams in front of them will have to lose in order for them to get in. But like I say, it is possible for them to get in. South Carolina State, Norfolk State. I should say Norfolk State just to root for chaos, but I think South Carolina State will get in.
Wouldn't it be, how crazy would that be? Wouldn't that be crazy to see that happen? Absolutely crazy. All right, and talking about the Florida Classic, Bethune-Cookman, winners of the last 8. Although, in the series history, FAMU is like 49-28-1 or something. But the current 8-game losing streak for Florida A&M has hung over this program like a bad plague, and it's claimed the lives of, let me see how many head coaches has it claimed. 1, 2. It's claimed the jobs of at least 3 different head coaches. 4 probably, because I'm thinking the Earl Holmes / who was it who finished the year when Earl Corey Fuller?
I think so.
Anyway, I think it has claimed 4 coaches over the 8-game losing streak. I don't even remember. It might be a trivia question. Who was the last FAMU coach to win a Florida Classic game? That might be a trivia question at this point. But Coach Simmons, and really this is a game that I feel like it's bigger for, the Florida A&M season under Willie Simmons has really been cemented. The future is bright. But for one particular Rattler, this game will sort of cement his place in history. Now, he may have a lot of the passing records, but if you were ever to be considered in the top 5, when we look 10 years from now and we think of the top 5 quarterbacks in Florida A&M history, he may own all the records. But he also owns an 0-3 record against Bethune-Cookman, and I'm speaking of the quarterback Ryan Stanley. He among anybody needs and wants a win, because a win would do 2 things. 1, it would break the streak. It would give him his first win. And then secondly, it would cement the Black College National Championship for FAMU. I think it would instantly move him into top 5 passing career. It would cement his place as one of the 5 best all time. I'm not going to go so far and say he's 1 or 2, but I think it would move him into that status as he is that bridge quarterback to the future, that bridge quarterback for the Willie Simmons era. And so 10 years from now, when we're talking about the Willie Simmons era and all of its national championships and all that other stuff, it'll be the Ryan Stanley game against Bethune that cemented. So, AD, dare you give a prediction or a score, or do you stand on the sideline and just watch it play out?
Brian, I will have my green and orange on. There's even no need to ask me that question, Brian.
All right, so you're going FAMU. Care to give a score? Well, yeah, how close or how lopsided do you expect this to be?
I hope the score is about 75-0, Brian. And yes, I'm definitely going by heart on this one. My head is out. When FAMU and Bethune play, my head goes out the window. I am all heart, and my heart pumps green this weekend.
Yeah, I think there is a large contingent of people who want to see just an absolute beating. They just want to see an absolute beating. Yeah, a coronation to this season, just an absolute beating. Which I think that would be great, to be honest with you. But it remains to be seen. Will we see it? Hopefully so. I'm going FAMU in that one. I don't even know what the verse is. I don't even care. It's just all FAMU in that one. A couple other quick notes here, AD, and then we're going to log out and get out of here. I got to mention, in the SWAC, Alcorn State obviously has won their 6th consecutive SWAC East, but they haven't necessarily wrapped up the number 1 seed, or I should say the overall seed in the SWAC in terms of hosting the championship. I believe
that will be determined in the Soul Bowl this weekend. Correct me if I'm wrong, Brian.
No. Well, is that no? Soul Bowl was. I thought the Soul Bowl was Jackson State versus Southern. Well, anyway, Alcorn State plays Jackson State this week, and if I read correctly, Jackson State is hosting. No, you're correct. No, you're correct. It says Soul Bowl. Yep, I guess so. Okay. Anyway, so Alcorn in the Soul Bowl, Alcorn State versus Jackson State. That way, if Alcorn State wins that game, it will definitely decide. It will definitely go. Alcorn State will host again the SWAC championship game. If they were to lose this game, they would be traveling to either Grambling or Southern, and it's all based on whoever wins the Bayou Classic clinches the SWAC West. So obviously, our number 2 team in our last poll, we haven't released the new poll yet. So as you're listening to this, we haven't released the new poll for week 13, but I don't think it'll change, where Grambling should still be number 2 and Alcorn will still be number 3. So we'll just kind of wait to see what happens. But that's one. And my number 2 point, Tennessee State traveling to Tennessee Tech. It will be the last game for Mr. Chris Rowland for Tennessee State, who, as of this game, as of today, this recording, in terms of total yards, all-purpose yards, he's sitting currently at 1,949 yards, which is number 1 in terms of total yards in FCS football. Now, his yard per game average is 177.18, which is actually number 2. So don't be confused between yards per game and total yards. A young man from out of Dayton who's only played in 9 games actually is the yard per game leader. And, it's funny, he's actually had more plays in 9 games than Chris Rowland has had in 11 games. So just think about that for a second. Receiving yards, Chris Rowland leading the country with 1,289 receiving yards. I wanted to find his total receptions, because we talked about how close he was to Jaquay Nunnally and Jerry Rice, who were the last 2 HBCU players in our recollection that had over 100 yards or 100 receptions. Is that right? Can you think of anybody else?
No, I can't off the top of my head.
Okay, so here we go. Receptions per game, which will lead me to total receptions. So Chris Rowland is number 2 in receptions per game, 8.4. In terms of total receptions, he is number 2. He has 92 receptions on the year. He is 4 behind a young man from Houston Baptist. Same number of games, 11 games. And he's 1 ahead a young man from Northwestern State. So so they're basically the top 3 in the nation in terms of total receptions, 96, 92, and 91. So Rowland has 92. His receiving yardage, though, is what separates him from the other 2 guys. His reception yardage of 1289, as I mentioned, leads the country. And so this could technically be the last time we talk about Chris Rowland, and I think it easily puts him in the conversation for Black College Player of the Year. He will be there. I'm sure Jermaine Martin will be there. Akil Glass will be there. Jordan Bentley should probably be there. You know, he is number 3 now in rushing yards this season. I think Jerome Johnson from Bowie State should be there. Felix Harper from Alcorn State might be the SWAC Player of the Year. If you really think about what he has done, and if they close it off with a win in the Soul Bowl, he very well might be the SWAC Player of the Year, replacing Noah Johnson. Anybody I mentioned that should be up for consideration for Black College Player of the Year, AD?
You pretty much hit the hit the big ones there, Brian. You know, I'm trying to think of anybody off the top of my head whose name I just remember calling so much. One other one, what's the name? The running back out in Langston, Brian. Averaged about 148 yards per game.
Whitfield, he's had a good year,
Whitfield.
But I don't think it's been.
Yeah, he's had a good year.
It's a good year.
Throw it out there.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, he's had a good year. I mean, you know, I don't think it's. I mean, there are other guys. I mean, guys like Whitfield, Wellington from Shawan, Hosea Franklin from Lincoln, Missouri. I mean, they've all had good seasons. So I mean, don't want to discredit any of those guys. They've all had great years. All right. So you know, just go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say that was my final. That was it for me. I was gonna give you the last word. Anything you wanted to add on any topic before we close this pod out?
The Heritage Classic, is that what it was called in St. Louis, Missouri? They changed the name to the Old Man River Classic.
Okay.
Was it the St. Louis Heritage Classic? Has been canceled, Brian.
What?
BCSG, and this is first published October 23rd, and I found this in 2 different sources, and I'll just read this for you.
So this was the game between that was supposed to be Kentucky State and Lincoln,
Missouri.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay. BCSG 360, the organizer of the St. Louis Heritage Classic, has announced that all events, including the football game between Lincoln University of Missouri Blue Tigers and Kentucky State University Thoroughbreds, have been canceled for November 23rd, 2019. The Old Man River Classic event was originally scheduled to be held at the Dome at America Center in St. Louis. And if those, for reference, that was the home of the St. Louis Rams for their years in St. Louis. According to a press release by the organization, due to the result of low ticket sales, it was mutually agreed by BCSG 360 and both Lincoln University and Kentucky State University not to move forward with the event in 2019. BCSG 36 is working with the stakeholders to execute the event for a date in 2020. And then they go on to thank certain people for what they've done. And I'm looking at another source. This is lex18.com where I'm reading this from. And this obviously did not happen. Kentucky State will try to fill its schedule with another game, but there is little time to do so. Their only openings are November 16th and November 23rd. Maybe they should have called Virginia State. Yeah, I just threw a cheap shot.
That's a great way to close the show. Beautiful way to close. Man, I'll tell you. All right, well, that's going to do it. Follow us on Instagram and Twitter at
But you stay hard.